Well, Happy New Year and welcome to Focus Today. And here as we are heading into a brand new year. And last night, the House of Representatives finally voted, and we're still trying to kind of shuffle through all of the things that have apparently happened. The president's on Air Force One, heading back to Hawaii to vacation, and whatever bill they came up with, apparently he can sign it electronically. So we'll keep an eye on all this stuff. But one of the gentlemen that I have come to really appreciate and consider him a good friend is our buddy John Gizzi. John heads up, in fact, he is the chief political editor for Human Events magazine. You see him a lot when they go to the White House for the news conferences. There's John, usually around the front row somewhere, sitting down and asking great questions. And so I'm delighted to have John with us today as the first guest of this new year to start off some things and maybe get a handle on what happened last night, and more importantly, where is the conservative movement in the United States. John, are you with us?
Yeah, I certainly am. Happy New Year, and my cup runneth over at being your first guest.
Well, I'm delighted and honored. God bless you, friend. Well, first of all, you have Human Events has named the Conservative of the Year. Give us the winner.
I'm proud to say it's a conservative who stood on principle, took abuse as it was thrown at him like shrapnel, was tested as just about no one was in the political realm this year, and survived stronger than ever. I'm talking about Wisconsin's Governor Scott Walker, who pushed through a measure simply requiring some state employees to pay a little bit larger share of their pension and health care benefits. And for that, he was recalled by a labor-fueled campaign. He stood his ground and said that he either had to raise taxes or fire employees en masse from the state payroll. This was the only alternative. And the employees wound up paying less than people do in the private sector, or rather, spending less on health and pension benefits than people do in the private sector. That said, he survived the recall in a nationally watched contest that attracted colleagues of mine from Britain's BBC and France's La Figaro. And, well, look at him. He got a hero's welcome at the Republican National Convention. He's Human Events' Conservative of the Year, and some people already talk of him of running for something else in 2016.
Wow. Was part of that provision, John, that allowed folks to opt out of the union too?
Yes, exactly. Collective bargaining was eliminated for state employees. And as a result, those who are not required to pay dues to unions have a little bit more to spend on a private health care plan if they want it, or on schooling for their children if they want to move them to another school. The point is that unions can no longer tell people who work for the state they have to join.
All right. Now, since he got the bill through, he survived a recall. Do you think this is trend-setting across the country on other public unions? Well,
I certainly think it's a long fight, and every state is different, Perry. Ohio, they tried to go for the full vote. Governor Walker wisely exempted police and firefighters because their job is safety. He did not want to stir any controversy up with them, leading to a possible strike by those who protect our streets and save us from fires. Governor Kasich of Ohio wanted to go all the way, and that is have police and firefighters treated the same as other state employees. This made enemies out of people who would campaign for him for governor, and his measure was defeated at the polls. He suffered a political setback, but I think he's on the road to recovery right now. In Michigan, Governor Rick Snyder opposed right to work, which would be so surprised in a state that seems to be the Vatican City of organized labor. And what happened was labor tried to go all the way. They wanted to codify collective bargaining in their state constitution. In other words, what their comrades in Wisconsin were losing, they wanted to make unlosable by putting in the Constitution. Well, the voters turned that down resoundingly, just as they were voting to reelect Barack Obama last fall. And then a few people said, let's go a step further. They pushed right to work. The state legislature passed it, and Governor Snyder signed it. So again, all these issues depend on the state, and they depend on the issues per se and the political climate. But right now, it looks pretty good for conservatives, given Wisconsin and Michigan.
All right, let me just say to our listeners and viewers, we are delighted to have with us John Gizzi today. He's the chief editor, political editor for Human Events magazine, and announcing this morning that the 2012 Conservative of the Year, named by Human Events magazine, is Governor Walker. And just to give you an idea, in the past, 2011, it went to former vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan. 2010, it was Senator Jim DeMint. I want to talk to you about his move.
Sure.
2009, Vice President Dick Cheney. 2008, Governor Sarah Palin. And 2007, Rush Limbaugh. Before I get over to Jim DeMint, let's come back to last night, John Boehner and the House of Representatives. I'm looking at some of the numbers, trying to digest it. The only potential I see that could possibly be good out of this would be the death tax. Even though it's high, it was protected from going higher. Otherwise,
exactly.
Otherwise, it just looks like everything's pretty much, they kicked the can down the road and created a bigger mess.
Well, I'm not sure I'd say it's a bigger mess, Perry, and here is why. To use an overused phrase, consider the alternative. Had Republicans voted against it, and I was in touch with a lot of Republican members last night who were going to do just that, but had they voted it down, you and I would automatically be paying big taxes right away. The Bush tax cuts were made permanent for more than 99% of Americans. To me, that's an improvement over having taxes go up for everyone.
Now that alone, John, is the bone of contention among the Democrats, because it looks like the Bush tax cuts, 98% of them stay in place. So the
99.
Okay, well, 1%. But I guess what I'm saying is that was the hard one for the Democrats to swallow.
Exactly. I listened to Senator Tom Harkin, a very liberal Democrat from Iowa, earlier in the day, saying this was just going to be too much. Too many Americans were not paying, in his words, their fair share. But these were saved. Sequestration and the cuts are kicking in, albeit, as you say, they're going to be kicked down the can and looked at again. Now, my own problem with Republicans in Congress was that they would not accept Speaker Boehner's Plan B over the weekend, which would have started the higher taxes for people who made $1 million or above. That's even less people who would be affected by higher taxes. So in the end, they voted for higher taxes on those who make $450,000. That's still quite a bit away from what Barack Obama and Press Secretary Jay Carney told us repeatedly at the White House, that the president wanted $250,000 and above to pay higher taxes this year. Now, again, I would also say to you that we're all going to pay higher taxes anyway. The payroll tax is going up.
Yeah.
We'll pay $1,000 extra in taxes, every American.
Social Security and everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, regardless of what your economic status is, and I pointed out, if nothing came out of this agreement, we would still pay higher taxes because of, you guessed it, the Affordable Health Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And I'll give you a personal example that people can relate to. The highest amount of money you can set aside that cannot be taxed for use of medical needs, be it glasses or a trip to the dentist or getting your heart checked or anything like that, is $6,000 per family. The threshold of $6,000 was lowered to $2,500. That means for people who put in the maximum, that includes our family, now there's more money the government can tax, $3,500 more to be exact.
Wow. Boy, this has got so much. Let me ask you a question, and I'll have to go to break and we can get it on the other side. Do you think last night's decision opens a door for people like Rubio and Kander to go after Boehner?
I don't know about Rubio is in the Senate.
Well, I know.
In the House?
Well, yeah, but I mean, he voted no against it, and then that does set a signal over to the House. And I don't know if Kander's, if this opens the opportunity for him to go after the Speaker.
I'm going to say no, Perry, for two reasons. One, as a student of history, Republicans historically do not go after their top leadership. Democrats do. They have fights all the time and purges. Republicans have done it at the committee level and in some lower level
interesting
leadership spots, but certainly not for the top positions.
All right.
The second thing is this. John Boehner, as Shakespeare said, may be hoisted by his own petard. He's one of the nicest people on Capitol Hill. Never a harsh word about anyone. He's a golfer. He likes to have a cigarette, an occasional cocktail with everyone. Never really uses the whip. He is the polar opposite of a Pelosi. If members disagreed, she would have their offices out in the parking lot. Or a Newt Gingrich. The closest he has ever come to that is when he disciplined 4 members who refused to vote to lift the debt ceiling. And what was their punishment? Taking them off a committee that they liked.
Yeah.
And that's as far as it goes.
John, from what I understand now, again, just a snapshot of what happened last night, we got $1 in tax cuts and $41 in tax increases. That clearly is kicking the can down the road, don't you think?
Well, that's without sequestration. That's not supposed to kick in for 2 months. So you have 2 choices right now. One, sequestration, which are major cuts in the Defense Department.
Yeah.
In fact, $500 billion in 10 years,
wow,
plus payments to Medicare providers. And those are just at the tip of the iceberg. Now, again, President Obama has the burden on his shoulders to talk to the leaders of his own party and the Democratic constituency about seriously facing entitlements. Let me introduce a new character who's familiar to you and to human events. He was our last Man of the Year, Conservative of the Year, Paul Ryan. The House Budget Committee chairman and former vice presidential candidate has been conspicuous by his silence during this whole rancorous and very emotional debate. This would be the time for him to step up to the plate and perhaps dust off his plan for reform of Medicare right now. And I would just simply say that if you're listening, Mr. Chairman, please do so. Your leadership is needed.
Yeah. Why do you think he was so quiet?
I don't know. I got an email from a member of Congress who I provided anonymity to, who said that during the entire conference he said nothing. I don't understand it. This would be the time for him to demonstrate leadership.
Do we know how he voted last night?
He voted in favor of it in the end.
Okay. All right, I want to come back to Senator DeMint. He, from South Carolina, he jumps out of the Senate and goes over to the Heritage Foundation. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, the whole idea of resigning from the Senate to take a lucrative private sector job is really unprecedented, at least in recent years. People either resign because they're forced to and want to avoid prosecution for a scandal. John Ensign of Nevada comes to mind, or they die in office, or they simply retire when their term is up. Senator DeMint had always limited himself to 2 terms, and he was a great champion of term limits. He himself said he was frustrated in the Senate. He told me that his greatest accomplishments are things he did outside the Senate, like helping people such as Marco Rubio of Florida and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania get elected to the Senate and already demonstrate leadership there. I have a feeling that when one combines that with the offer of a high-profile position in the conservative movement, it's like the Cadillac of conservative movement leadership positions that pays $1.1 million a year plus many fine benefits. That's an offer he couldn't refuse. Now, again, as someone who has looked upon members of Congress as I did hockey players, baseball players, or boxers growing up, it's a little hard for me to understand why someone would opt for the money. It breaks my heart to see members of Congress, some of them in their 40s, resign from a position that a lot of us worked hard to put them in just to take a job going back to their old colleagues in Washington and asking for favors on the tax code or something else. This Jim DeMent's not doing that, but there still is something to be said for public service down the line.
John, may we just continue down the philosophical line just for a moment, but so how are you assessing the conservative movement in the country? I don't think we're mortally wounded, because if you look back at some of the states, conservatives did quite well in the governorships and some of the House and Senate races, but we seem to be totally ineffective on the national scene. How are you assessing this?
Well, as Newt Gingrich said, thank God for the states, because indeed conservatives are making progress. We discussed earlier what Governor Walker was doing in Wisconsin, Governor Snyder in Michigan, and other states. Legislators are becoming the chief scientists for modern conservatism, coming up with fresh ideas all the time. And that's something that the national conservative movement has been woefully lacking in recent years. It seems as though the old R word, reactionary, comes more to mind when you think of national conservative leadership. Not so at the state level. And I'm pleased to say that tomorrow I will be attending a conference of leaders of foundations and think tanks from all 50 states here in Washington that will discuss some of the ideas that are coming up for the states. For example, how to provide for health care without going into exchanges that are required under the Affordable Health Care Act, seeking waivers from Medicare the way states did from welfare requirements years ago, and trying to deal with it on its own. The 10th Amendment is alive and well among conservatives in the state capitals, and I'm pleased to say that I'll be doing a lot of traveling, going to state capitals, state Republican Party meetings, and state versions of the Conservative Political Action Conference. And I think you'll find a conservative movement that's alive and quite vibrant there.
Great. Well, when you're on the West Coast, let us know. We'll nab you. So it appears that the conservatives' stance and positions on these policies still are very viable, but the way we go about messaging that stance seems to be in trouble. The old saying is that we try to get to the heart by going through the head. Maybe we need to go to the heart in order to get to the head.
Exactly. And one of the things is that Newt Gingrich pointed out, Ronald Reagan and Jack Kemp were successful because they talked to people outside the conservative inner circle. Ronald Reagan came of age in Hollywood. He was president of his union. He knew a lot of people who were different from him, and he listened to them. Jack Kemp showered with people from the ghetto when he played professional football. He could connect with people who were different. To a degree, Gingrich was like that. I used to always just roll my eyes when I found out he was talking to people like the Tofflers, that he was saying we should listen to the leaders of the Million Man March and the Muslims here, because they might have some ideas about why minorities are upset with politics in general. And yet I came to realize maybe you should listen to people who are completely different from you. And let me add one more thing about that, Perry. I, John Gizzi, over the years have been guilty of the same thing. Talking to too many people who are like me, be it people I've met at Republican state conventions or at our CPAC, Conservative Political Action Conference here, or through speaking dates around the country. And my New Year's resolution is when I go to a different state to try to meet people who are a little bit different, albeit politically active, and see what they have to say.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I've learned that.
It's a problem.
Well, it is, and I've learned that the hard way myself. I mean, we can be idealistic, but sometimes it doesn't move the ball, and we end up being marginalized. My concern, you know, I mean, takes, for instance, the immigration issue. Newt threw a bomb out during the presidential debates on his response on the immigration issue, but you stop and think about it, he was right. We're not thinking through these issues. We're just drawing a hard line, and I'm wondering if the conservatives are beginning to realize, no, wait a minute, we're dealing with human beings here. We got to think about these things, not give up on our principles, but figure out another way to get to the end.
Yeah, and remember one thing. The principles are golden the way they stand.
Right.
The problem is with the messenger and the articulation of those principles. Let me put it another way. Barry Goldwater ran for president, lost disastrously in 1964 because people said he was extreme, he was beyond the pale. They parodied his slogan, in your heart, you know he's right, in your guts, you know he's nuts. Okay. Ronald Reagan said exactly what Goldwater did, but he said it in a different way, particularly with regard to things like the Tennessee Valley Authority or Social Security that voters were very sensitive about and in many cases had taken for granted as part of the landscape. And you know the rest of the story with Ronald Reagan. It was not so much the message was flawed, it was the messenger.
Well, John, you're a delight, and let's stay in touch and see how things go, and we'll have you on quite often. If you're on the West Coast, let me know. I'll hook up with you. And
you bet, Perry.
We appreciate you, friend. Keep on keeping on, and look forward to having you back real soon.
Always a pleasure. God bless you.
God bless you, my friend. John Gizzi with us today from Human Events. He's the chief political editor of Human Events magazine.